Visions of the end, ancient prophecies coming alive before our eyes. For most of history, when people read the old prophetic texts, they read them as poetry, as metaphor, as warnings wrapped in symbolism meant to be felt rather than literally fulfilled. A river drying up wasn't really a river. A beast with 10 horns wasn't really a beast. It was all allegory, safely locked away in the ancient past, disconnected from anything you or I would ever actually witness. But something strange is happening right now, quietly, almost too quietly for most of the world to notice. The river at the center of one of the Bible's most infamous prophecies is actually drying up, not symbolically, physically, measurably by satellite. Technologies that ancient writers had no words for, that they could only describe as the beast that speaks or the mark, now sit in our pockets, controlling how we buy, sell, and connect. And beneath one of the most contested strips of land on Earth, archaeologists, treasure hunters, and true believers are still digging, convinced that something buried 2,000 years ago is waiting to surface at exactly the wrong or exactly the right moment. Here's the question that should keep you up at night. Why now? Why is all of this converging in our lifetime, in this generation, in the 21st century, and not 50 years ago or 500? Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to walk through 4 ancient prophecies that were written thousands of years apart by different authors in different languages on different continents, and yet all seem to be pointing at the same moment in time, our moment. We'll start at the Euphrates, the river the book of Revelation says must dry up before the end can begin. We'll move to Jerusalem, where a small red animal might be the most consequential creature on the planet right now. We'll look at the explosion of information and artificial intelligence through the lens of a 2,500-year-old prophecy from the book of Daniel. And later, stay with me for this one, we're going to go underground, literally, beneath the streets of Jerusalem, where a controversial American excavator named Ron Wyatt claimed to find something that, if true, changes everything we thought we understood about how this story ends. Is this all coincidence, pattern recognition gone into overdrive? Or are we genuinely the first generation in human history to watch ancient prophecy step off the page and into the headlines? Let's find out. Part 2, the geopolitical pulse. The Euphrates and the East. To understand why so many people are watching the news differently these days, you have to start with a single verse most people have never even heard of. Revelation chapter 16, verse 12. It describes what's called the 6th bowl of wrath, one in a series of catastrophic events described near the climax of the book. And this one is oddly specific. It says an angel pours out a bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water is dried up, so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. For most of the last 2,000 years, that verse was treated as pure symbolism. The Euphrates is enormous, nearly 1,700 miles long, flowing from the mountains of Turkey through Syria and Iraq before emptying into the Persian Gulf. The idea of it simply drying up seemed as far-fetched as the moon turning to blood in the previous chapter. And then satellite data started coming in. Since the early 2000s, hydrologists using NASA's GRACE satellites, which measure changes in Earth's water mass with startling precision, have tracked a staggering decline in the Tigris-Euphrates River basin. Some studies estimate the region lost tens of cubic kilometers of fresh water in under a decade, making it one of the fastest rates of water loss anywhere on the planet outside of the polar ice caps. Turkey's massive dam projects upstream, decades of drought intensified by climate change, and unsustainable irrigation across Iraq and Syria have combined to bring long stretches of the Euphrates to their lowest levels in recorded history. In parts of Iraq, riverbeds that were flowing a generation ago are now cracked earth. Marshlands that Iraqi families have fished for centuries are turning to dust. Locals aren't speaking in metaphors when they describe what they're seeing. They're describing a river that is, in very literal terms, running out. Now overlay that onto the geopolitics of the region. The land the Euphrates cuts through, Iraq, Syria, the broader corridor connecting the Middle East to Iran and onward towards Central and East Asia, is precisely the corridor a modern military or economic power from the East would need to move through to reach the Levant. A dried, weakened, more easily crossed river basin isn't just an environmental catastrophe. Strategically, it's an open door. Whether that's coincidence, cyclical climate patterns, or something else, is obviously for each of us to weigh. But it's worth sitting with the fact that a text written roughly 1900 years ago names this exact river as a hinge point in world events. And today, that river is disappearing in front of our eyes. But there's a second layer to the Euphrates story that goes even deeper into ancient tradition, and it has nothing to do with armies. In multiple strands of ancient Jewish and early Christian literature, texts like the Book of Enoch, which was hugely influential in the era around Jesus' lifetime, even though it isn't part of most modern biblical canons, there's a recurring account of rebellious heavenly beings, often called the Watchers, who are said to have been bound and imprisoned deep within the earth, specifically in connection with this same river region, as punishment for corrupting humanity before the flood. This ties into the broader, deeply strange biblical tradition of the Nephilim, described in Genesis chapter 6 as the offspring of these fallen beings and human women, giants whose presence on earth is given as one of the reasons for the flood judgment in the first place. Revelation's own imagery seems to echo this old tradition. Just one chapter after the Euphrates dries up, in chapter 9, the text describes beings released from the bottomless pit, led by a figure called Abaddon, or Apollyon, a name that literally means the destroyer. Ancient readers steeped in the Enoch tradition would have made an immediate connection. The drying of the Euphrates isn't just clearing a path for human armies. In the deeper mythological reading, it's removing the final seal over something that was buried, something ancient civilizations across the region, from Mesopotamian myth to Jewish apocalyptic literature, seemed almost obsessed with keeping contained. Is that a literal expectation or a piece of ancient symbolism drawing on shared regional mythology? Reasonable people land in very different places on that question, but you can't deny the strange symmetry. The same river, the same region, the same ancient stories, converging with real satellite data in the exact era we're living in right now. Part 3, the Third Temple and the Jerusalem Knot. If the Euphrates is the slow-burning geopolitical fuse, Jerusalem is the powder keg it's connected to. It's worth pausing on just how strange this is from a purely secular geopolitical standpoint. Jerusalem is a mid-sized city. It has no major natural resources, no oil, no strategic ports, and yet it remains arguably the single most contested piece of real estate on the face of the planet. A city fought over, conquered, and reconquered more than almost anywhere in recorded history. At the center of that conflict sits a plateau smaller than most college campuses, the Temple Mount, known to Muslims as the Haram al-Sharif, home to the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, and to Jews, the site of the First and Second Temples, the holiest location in Judaism. For observant Jews awaiting a third temple, and for many Christians who read Old and New Testament prophecy as pointing toward a rebuilt temple in the end times, this tiny plot of land isn't just religiously significant, it's prophetically load-bearing. The books of Ezekiel and Daniel, along with passages in the New Testament like 2 Thessalonians and the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, all describe a future temple standing in Jerusalem. And Daniel specifically ties events in that temple to the unfolding of the end times. Here's what makes this more than theoretical. There's an organization actively preparing for it right now. The Temple Institute, based in Jerusalem's Old City, has spent decades researching, designing, and in many cases physically constructing the ritual objects required for temple service under Mosaic law. Priestly garments woven to exact specifications, gold implements, and even a full-scale altar. They run active training programs for men who trace descent from the priestly line of Aaron, teaching them the sacrificial procedures that haven't been performed in roughly 2,000 years, since the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in the year 70. And then there's the detail that sounds almost too specific to be real: the red heifer. In the book of Numbers, chapter 19, the law describes a unique purification ritual required before certain priestly duties can resume, centered on a completely red cow, without a single non-red hair, that has never been yoked for labor. Jewish tradition holds that its ashes are needed to ritually purify the priests and the temple site itself before any future temple service could even begin. For centuries, that requirement made a rebuilt temple functionally impossible. Genuinely red heifers meeting the strict criteria are almost never born naturally. In recent years, that changed. Cattle breeders in the United States, working with Israeli religious organizations, have successfully bred and shipped candidate red heifers to Israel, animals examined by rabbinic authorities as potentially meeting the ancient criteria. To believers watching closely, this isn't a curiosity. It's being described openly as a kind of prophetic clock, the final missing piece being assembled in real time on a timeline no human being controls, because you cannot simply order a genetically pure red heifer whenever you want one. Now, layer the politics on top. Any attempt to build a third temple runs directly into the reality that Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock currently occupy that same ground. Sacred sites central to the religious life of over 1 billion Muslims worldwide. Which raises the question this video can't resolve for you, but wants to put directly to you: how do you see it? Is a peaceful resolution for the Temple Mount even something realistically on the table? Some future where multiple faiths share or negotiate that space? Or is this genuinely an unavoidable collision, one that ancient prophetic texts effectively called thousands of years in advance? I'd honestly like to know where you land on that, because I don't think there's an easy answer. Part 4, the digital Babylon and the information storm. Let's shift now from ancient soil to modern screens, because this next prophecy might be the one that hits closest to home, literally, since you're probably watching this on the very technology it seems to describe. In the book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 4, an angelic figure tells Daniel to seal up his prophetic writings until the time of the end, adding a strange qualifier, that in that final era, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. For most of human history, that verse didn't mean much practically. Knowledge grew slowly, generation by generation, largely locked inside institutions, monasteries, and universities. Travel was rare, difficult, and local. But look at where we are now. In the last 30 years alone, humanity has generated more raw information than in the entirety of prior recorded history combined. And it isn't just increasing, it's accelerating. The advent of the internet, then smartphones, then the current explosion of artificial intelligence has meant that knowledge, real and false alike, moves at a literal speed of light, running to and fro across a planet more physically interconnected by air travel than at any point in human history. Which brings us to a much stranger passage tucked into Revelation chapter 13, the description of an image of the beast that is somehow given breath or the ability to speak, and that can command worship or punishment. For most of Christian history, interpreters wrestled with this one. How exactly could an image, a statue, actually talk? It sounded like it required literal, supernatural animation. But today, we have generative artificial intelligence capable of producing a synthetic voice, a synthetic face, and increasingly, autonomous decision-making. Systems that can, quite literally, be given the appearance of speech and independent judgment. Digital avatars, AI spokespeople, deep-faked leaders. None of this technology is hypothetical anymore. It exists today, and it's improving month over month. Then there's the passage that tends to generate the most conversation of all, Revelation chapter 13, verse 17, which describes a coming economic system where no one is able to buy or sell without some kind of mark or identifying association tied to the beast. Set aside for a moment any specific interpretation of what that mark literally is.
Just consider the infrastructure question.
Is it technically possible right now in 2026 to build a global system where every purchase, every transaction is tied to a verified digital identity? One that could, in theory, be switched on or off for any individual at the press of a button. The honest answer is yes. Central bank digital currencies are already being piloted by multiple governments. Biometric payment systems are already live in several countries. Social credit and identity-linked financial systems already exist in some form today. None of this infrastructure existed in any meaningful, deployable way even 15 years ago. The technical capability for a fully centralized, identity-gated economic system has only existed for roughly the last 5 to 10 years of human history. That's the part that stops a lot of researchers cold. Not that the technology exists, technology always advances, but that a text written in the 1st century seems to describe with unnerving specificity a system that was functionally impossible to build for 19 out of the last 20 centuries, and has only become buildable in the exact sliver of time we happen to be alive in. Part 5. Archaeology of the Apocalypse. Ron Wyatt's Discoveries. Now we go underground. Beneath the city of Jerusalem is a labyrinth most tourists never see. Ancient cisterns, sealed tunnels, quarries dating back 3,000 years, and chambers that archaeologists are still mapping today. And it's in that underground world where one of the most polarizing figures in modern biblical archaeology claimed to make the discovery of a lifetime. Ron Wyatt was an American nurse anesthetist, not a trained archaeologist, who spent decades in the late 20th century pursuing biblical relics across the Middle East. His claims are, without exaggeration, some of the most debated in the entire field. And it's important to say clearly that mainstream archaeology, and even many biblical scholars from within Christian institutions, have not accepted his findings and have raised serious, substantive objections to nearly all of them. But the claim itself is worth understanding because of how deeply it wires into prophecy. Wyatt asserted that in a chamber beneath the site, traditionally associated with Golgotha, the location of the crucifixion, he located what he believed to be the lost Ark of the Covenant, the gold-covered chest described in the book of Exodus as housing the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, hidden away, according to Wyatt, in the centuries following the Babylonian destruction of the First Temple to keep it from being seized or destroyed. He further claimed to have found evidence linking a crack in the chamber's ceiling, caused in his account by the earthquake described in the Gospels at the moment of the crucifixion, directly down to the mercy seat of the ark itself below. Skeptics point out significant problems with the chronology, the site identification, the chain of documentation, and the fact that Wyatt's most dramatic claims were never independently verified by outside archaeological teams with access to the same location. It remains, by any honest account, an unresolved and contested claim rather than an established fact. And yet the underlying idea Wyatt tapped into is one with deep roots in genuine ancient Jewish tradition, completely separate from his specific claims. Multiple ancient sources, including the apocryphal Second Book of Maccabees, describe traditions in which the prophet Jeremiah hid the ark in a cave on Mount Nebo before the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, explicitly stating that its location would remain unknown until God gathers his people together again. Rabbinic tradition, including passages in the Mishnah, likewise holds that the ark was hidden beneath the Temple Mount itself before the Babylonians arrived, in specially prepared chambers built for exactly this purpose, to protect it until a future climactic moment of restoration. That's the piece that gives Wyatt's controversial claim its staying power, regardless of what you conclude about his specific excavation. The idea of the Ark being deliberately hidden, not lost, hidden, to be revealed at history's most critical turning point, isn't something Wyatt invented. It's baked into Jewish tradition going back 2,000 years. Whether it's sitting in a chamber beneath modern Jerusalem right now, waiting, is a question nobody living today can answer with certainty. But it's a question a surprising number of serious people are still actively trying to answer. Because if any part of that tradition is accurate, its rediscovery wouldn't just be an archaeological headline. Given everything we've walked through, the river, the temple, the red heifer, the technology, it would be arriving at precisely the moment prophetic tradition says it's supposed to. So where does that leave us? We've covered a lot of ground tonight. A river disappearing on satellite imagery, a temple being quietly prepared stone by stone, a red heifer that shouldn't exist meeting a 2,000-year-old requirement, an artificial intelligence revolution that's given voice to something ancient prophecy seemed to anticipate, and a hidden relic that may or may not still be waiting in the dark beneath Jerusalem. None of this is about pinpointing a date. Throughout history, people who confidently predicted the exact day the world would end have, without exception, been wrong. And it's worth remembering that the biblical texts themselves explicitly warn against that kind of date setting. What we're doing here is something different, paying attention, reading the signs of the times, as the phrase goes, not to panic, but to understand the world we're actually living in with open eyes instead of closed ones. And here's the thing worth sitting with as we close. These prophetic texts at their core were never really written as horror stories. They read that way if you only focus on the destruction. But underneath the imagery of bowls and beasts in drying rivers is a message that's fundamentally about hope. About a world that isn't spiraling meaninglessly toward chaos, but moving, however painfully, toward restoration. A warning, yes. But a warning is only frightening if there's nothing you can do about it. These texts were written again and again with calls to wake up, to prepare, to live differently in light of what's coming. Which means, whatever you believe about their literal fulfillment, they were meant to change how you live today, not just how you predict tomorrow. We've only scratched the surface of these ancient prophecies today. There's far more we didn't even get to. So I want to ask you directly, of everything we covered, which of these signs feels the most real, the most undeniable to you, in the world as it actually exists right now? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this kind of deep dive is something you want more of, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next time, because we're only just getting started.